I worked under 9 directors. Some of them did this better than others, and toward the end it was getting pretty dicey because you had Bill Casey and other people, Bobby Gates. Bobby Gates now is Secretary of Defense. Well, he's probably more responsible for the politicization of intelligence than anybody else, even George Tenet. So it became a mixed bag toward the end, but during the bulk of my career, and I always personally was able to call it the way I saw it, to the point where when I was briefing this president's father, he knew that I wasn't going to play up to him, that I wasn't going to join in the merriment when they were criticizing Mary McGovern or taking off after political opponents. And he respected me more for that because he knew what the profession was all about. And that, of course, is why it's so very painful. So very, very painful for us to start watching after 9/11 how our profession was not only politicized but totally corrupted in the service of cooking intelligence for a war that didn't need to happen. And specifically, it's bad enough that our profession was corrupted, but when we're talking about corrupting it for the express purpose of deceiving our elected representatives in the Congress out of their constitutional prerogative to declare or otherwise authorize war, well, it doesn't get any worse than that. And that's why we set up Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity in January of 2003 when we saw that the war was on the horizon. We did our best to warn the president with 3 memos, corporate memos from VIPS, before the war started, pointing out chapter and verse of what he was getting himself into, warning him, as we did in the first memo. We wrote that was interesting. We wrote that on the day that Colin Powell talked at the UN. We knew it would be a major milestone, and frankly, a couple of us were a little long in the tooth and hadn't been doing this very much recently, and so we set ourselves the objective of getting something out by 5 o'clock. AFP said they'd put it out on a wire. So, with a little trepidation, I was asked to be the primary drafter. I watched Powell, took copious notes, and just as I would a Brezhnev speech or a speech by Gorbachev. My first specialty was Soviet politics. And then I went to my little computer and typed up a draft and got it circulated by email. We didn't make 5 o'clock, we made it by 5:15, but that was time enough for AFP. And what we told the president, we told him 3 things. We told him, Mr. President, you should know that there are immense pressures on analysts within the intelligence community to come up with the line that Dick Cheney and others want them to come up with respect to causes for war. That this pressure was very noxious, that he needed to pay attention to more than ostensible violations of UN Security Council 1441. If you're going to play that game, well, you can't be real selective about Security Council resolution enforcement because, if anybody's disregarded them more than Israel, I don't know what country has. So if you're going to play this game, it's a little bit hypocritical if you just choose what country to do it on. And then finally, we said, Mr. President, what you need to do, with all due respect, is broaden the circle of your advisors beyond those who are clearly bent on a war for which we see no compelling reason, and from which we're convinced that the unintended consequences are going to be catastrophic. Now, we take no joy in having been right about that. There were a lot of people right about that. Scott Ritter was shouting from the rooftops. Who knew better than Scott Ritter about WMD in Iraq? He'd been there, done that. He said, Mr. President, we've destroyed 90%. We can assure you that 90% of those WMD have been destroyed. The other 10%, nobody's seen them. Yeah, they're not accounted for on this little ledger that somebody keeps, but there's no evidence they're there. Instead, our president decided to go with the Rumsfeld theorem, which is famously the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I guess he learned that at Princeton or something, but that's not the kind of intelligence work we did, nor did we do faith-based intelligence. You know, when these folks came in here 6 years ago, the big thing was faith-based this, faith-based that. Well, we never thought we'd be asked to do faith-based intelligence. And so we saw all that happening. We started speaking out. And I think we've done 16 corporate memos by now. We're still doing them. And what's really interesting is, is that it's just very exciting being on this side of the ledger. At taxpayer expense, we developed a lot of techniques, tools, to come at what makes a president, what makes a prime minister, what makes a country behave the way it does. And you know, I'll divulge a trade secret here. 80%, sometimes 90% of the information you need to assess or analyze important developments in countries or in issues, it's available in the mainstream press, it's available in the alternative press, it's out there. With computers these days, I go down in my pajamas at 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 10 o'clock, I'm where I used to be at the agency as an analyst, you know, 4:30 in the afternoon, ready to go home. And so everything you need really is available. Now, does it help to have a satellite image or an intercepted conversation? Yeah, that can really help. But it's rare that that happens, and usually it just substantiates judgments you've already arrived at from open sources. So here I am now with no fewer than 63, almost all retired intelligence professionals from all 16 intelligence agencies in our government. It's just, the situation is analogous to the one I found myself in when I was working on the President's Daily Brief, when I helped to produce that, and when I briefed it one-on-one with the President's father, when he was Vice President, Secretary Schultz, Weinberger, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and National Security Assistant. There were those 6 that were given access to that book, just one-on-one, and that was heady stuff. In any case, to do that job properly, I needed to know who the good people were. I mean, I was not going to write an article on Hamas or Hezbollah. I mean, I could try, but I wasn't the expert. There were people that knew 10 times as much as I did about those. So you would finger those people, you'd know who to call to ask to do the first draft. You'd sort of have an inquisition with them, asking all manner of questions that you might be asked the next morning, okay? But the point is, you knew where they were, you had access to them by a regular phone or by a secure phone, and you could get as up on these things as is humanly possible. Now, what's the situation now? Well, now, my colleagues and I are in a better situation than our opposite numbers who are still in government. Better? Why? Well, better because even though we lack a secure phone, we have regular phones and we have email, and the big difference is that we know that when we ask one of our colleagues a question, we're going to get an honest answer without any policy agenda, without any bias. Well, we all come out with biases, but you know, if somebody's been a colonel in the Army for 30 years, you take that into account. But you know, these are honest people. And so I still have that like beck and call. Anytime I want to do an article, the best of expertise on insurgencies, on special forces experience, Arabists, people who have served, people who've taught Arabic in West Point, economists, military experts from the ground up. It's just quite amazing. It's actually quite enlivening. And we all feel a real sense of mission here because it's an important job. We learned the techniques at taxpayer expense. Never did we in our wildest dreams think that we would be turning our techniques on our own government. But, you know, the corporate media certainly isn't. Who else is doing it? And so it's a strain, you know, most of us would like to be playing golf, but I've never seen a situation where this country is in such peril, both domestically and in foreign affairs, where this president and vice president have screwed up so famously and are in danger of really accelerating that by attacking Iran. It boggles the mind that these folks would think that they could do something like that. And I guess the sorrowful thing is that the corruption of the various institutions of government on the executive side. I mean, we have the head of NASA scientist writing about global warming, and some 30-year-old punk that worked on the Republican National Committee takes his pen out and says, well, he says it's a problem. I'd say, well, we just put a knot in there. Global warming is not a problem, you know. And then you get guys in the CIA who, you know, say, oh, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, we tortured him, and really he came up with great, great information, including just yesterday he confessed to being responsible for global warming. Now, well, he did confess to just about everything else. I mean, give me a break. There's a lack of expertise. This is what happens when you promote people or you put people in place as political appointees who really have no devotion to the truth.